everyone, welcome back to the last episode of season one. The thing about wildlife is anyone can fall in love with it through science, photography, literature, or by simply listening in.
So, thanks everyone for staying tuned, for joining us week after week. It's been such a fun journey for us, not just as the episodes have been rolling out, but even all of the months of work preceding the release of the podcast and preparing each episode and interviewing all of these super guests that we've had. And even though these weeks have gone by so quickly, we feel like we have a lot to reflect on. And so here we are, just Akshay and I today, wrapping up and looking back at some of these conversations we've had.
Yeah, thanks, Ishika. And just to get you, the listener, up to date with all the episodes that we had, and in case you missed out, do keep a keen ear on the next couple of minutes, so you can go back, pause this episode, go back, listen to the others, and come back here. So in episode one, we spoke to Dr. Nishant Srinivasaya. He's a behavioral ecologist who studies elephants for over a decade, nearly 2 decades now, and he intends to continue this work. And it was quite evident from his conversations that is where his deep love for nature comes from. And we found it extremely infectious while we were recording it, while we were editing it, and when we had to re-listen. And it seems like our listeners and you found it equally so. If you did, do let us know.
Yeah. And after that really fun episode to have started off on, we spoke to Dr. Krishnapriya Tama, and that episode was particularly insightful in terms of what the daily lives of people in the field are. And she spoke so much in depth about how we can practice truly inclusive ecology, how we can keep safe in the field, what day-to-day ethics ought to be across different workspaces, and how there's just so much interconnectedness in this field, because regardless of which path you go down, whether you're looking at a certain species or you're looking at trees, or whether you're looking at climate change, they're all just interwoven. And that was a very interesting episode as well, just to unpack some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was followed by a very different energy, but a very welcome addition to the kind of breadth that our podcast hopes to cover, which was Nisar Prakash, a wildlife biologist who studies otters. We spoke to him about kayaking, about his love for the landscape, and what basically motivates him to get up every morning, and his relationship with various personas on field, mental health. And we also had a guest appearance of his canine companion.
Yeah. And after that, we spoke to Dr. Nitya Prakash Mohanty, who is such an electric personality, and just, I think, brought our energy up in the podcast as well, just as we were talking to him. He's a herpetologist who perhaps has, from all our guests or even anyone else we've met, just such an insatiable scientific curiosity, and such a good humored guy. And he shared with us how he comes up with some of his most bizarre ideas for experiments with frogs and other invasive species. And he also told us a lot about island ecology. And we now realize we've spoken to a lot of people who worked in the island, and his was a good kickstarter to getting us to know that system really well.
Yeah, for sure. And it's great that we had that deep dive into science almost serendipitously while we were talking about his journey, because the next episode was about talking, communicating science and teaching and education while doing the science with none other than Narayan Sharma. And we felt like this was one of our most enduring episodes and also most inspiring, because he was among the more senior guests on our show, having seen a lot more of the field, and yet retaining perhaps even more passion than most of our guests. So without any of the jadedness that tends to come, especially with the millennials in this sector in India. So I think we had a great time talking to him about it, and his infectious enthusiasm for the land, for the sense of place that he experiences, was also very inspiring, and each of us can relate to it in our own ways, but with the same theme.
Yeah, no, so true. I think that sense of space is something we experience so deeply while speaking with him. And shortly after that, we had what ended up being our longest raw episode, which we then had to split up into two because we didn't want to lose any of what we had spoken about. Was with the very multi-talented Veena Kapoor, because she had such a diverse career and is still perhaps going to move on to things different from what we've spoken about. And few others have shown such versatility in all they've done within the field of wildlife. And I think we learned so much from her because she told us about various aspects of it, from academics to doing on ground conservation to admin work to fundraising to management to education and outreach. There's just so many facets to how you can work within this field, and our two episodes with Veena really brought that out. And yeah, that was quite it was overwhelming actually for Akshay and I when we were doing the interview, because we hadn't anticipated how much there was to talk about, and we're so happy that she spent that long with us and really allowed us to dissect every bit of her journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think something that made it even more, an experience was her candor. I mean, all of us have our game faces on, like this episode, or our guests who are trying to tell us a story. But with Veena, it was like it was her life story, which is also evident in some of the other podcasts, but it came out more strongly. And this was the feedback we received, and sort of, people were very happy about this. So that was the reason why we did not end up shrinking it into one episode, but in fact splitting it into two episodes. Yeah, on in the next episode we spoke to Dr. Meghna Agarwala, and that was a lovely episode, and we spoke about forests, and we spoke about how everything is interconnected, and we spoke a lot about her journey, starting in Delhi and then moving back to Delhi now as a professor, and it was really inspiring to see her growth as she sort of chronicled it, and how many people had a role to play. And I guess, interestingly, her perspective on working with the forest department is something very contrary to what many of us tend to, tell each other. And perhaps it's also food for thought to rethink our biases going in.
Yeah, I think we'll unpack that a little more today after we summarize these episodes, because that's such an interesting aspect of the work we do. And after we spoke with Meghna, we had one a very different kind of episode with Tarun Nair, where while he's also a herpetologist and he works exclusively almost in aquatic landscapes and so deeply loves river systems, I think he was so truly awe-inspiring for us, because he has been engaging meaningfully and actively with wildlife since he was a child, and not just in the sense that he used to follow stories or watch TV shows about it, or to or an animal lover in general, but someone who's actively been working with wildlife rescue since he was a young teenager. And just, I think in the first 2 minutes of that episode, we learn so much of the in-depth crazy experiences he's had from such a young impressionable age. And I think he was perhaps one of the most sincere advocates for wildlife we've had the honor of speaking with. So yeah, he was that was quite an episode where both we went through a series of emotions and highs and lows, just retracing his steps in this field. Yeah, if you haven't heard that one yet, that would be interesting.
Yeah, can't agree more, and definitely worth a re-listen to if you missed out on some of these nuances. Uh, Yeah, and just to, I think, break that energy, because sometimes podcasts can get intense, and this is definitely something that probably did that. We interspersed that with an episode on called "The Thing About Plants" with Krishna Anujan, and that was a lot more upbeat in some sense, and there was a lot of laughter. Not just because there was a lot of laughter, but because we recorded in person, which is a very different experience for us as well, and I guess for you as a listener as well. Do write in if you liked or didn't like it. And we spoke to Krishna about her professional career and her choice of studying plants and her affection for the Andaman Islands, which is a theme for this podcast so far. And I think we really enjoyed the energy and the optimism about science that we got through that conversation. And it was something that left us all, I think, happy about doing what we're doing. So that was, and yeah, that was great.
Yeah, it was definitely quite an interesting experience for us to have recorded that one in person, and definitely a very different energy, not just for what the end product sounded like, but even for us while we were interviewing Krishna. And yeah, definitely do send us your feedback. That would be great. And finally, last week, you heard us speak to Nupur Kale, who has spent so long working in the marine sphere, working with sea turtles and all that is related to them, and also actively with a lot of people. And this was a very cool episode because while she was the only purely marine person we spoke to this season, she also helped us disintegrate some of those internal biases we have towards what people in the marine sphere versus the terrestrial sphere are like and what work in these areas are like. And I think we did a little bit of myth busting there and got a good insight into what it's actually like and what the differences between these systems are. And it was really wonderful retracing her journey there as well, and in learning how even a very serendipitous way of getting involved with a species ends up becoming something very lifelong. And I think that it's what's been great through all of these episodes is really understanding what those turning points for a lot of people were. And yeah, so I think that was a really fun and light and yet insightful episode for us to have closed out all of the interviews for season 1 with.
Yeah. The other aspect that would be worth pointing to is when Nupur shared this episode on her social media, she mentioned that it was almost like she forgot that it was being recorded, and that, I think, that sort of summarized our experience as well, because this was the last episode of the podcast, and also the last episode we recorded when we recorded the series. And I guess we've become a lot more comfortable, and you've become a lot more comfortable listening to us, I suppose. So hopefully it's a start of something big going forward. And now you're here at episode 12. So
Yeah, for all of you who've come back week after week to listen to each episode, I mean, thank you so much. It's really kept us going to see you comment on our social media or DM us, or even just looking at repeat audiences in our podcast stats has been super encouraging. And it's left us with so many more ideas. So we are super excited. This may be the end of season 1, but we are brimming with ideas. So very excited to get to know you guys more intimately through whatever means you'd like to get in touch with us. So, for those of you who've been around since the start of this season and who listened to our little teaser bonus episode at the start, you know that the thing about wildlife has been a long time in the making. It's something that we've been brainstorming about for years now, and perhaps for both Akshay and I, the one silver lining of the pandemic that we actually managed to find some time and sit together and start producing this. And so it is quite truly a labor of love. And the reason why we did this was basically to tell you about the realities behind the science that people do, because we realize that there's no dearth of science communication. A lot of ecologists and conservationists now are actively doing outreach, writing articles, doing stuff, but they're always still talking about the science that they're doing. And after having spent a little time in the field ourselves, we realized that that's so far from the real picture, and that there's still a lot of romanticism associated with the field and what actually happens. And very few people who are interested in even getting into the field, say young students who we hope are listening in, we realized that perhaps you guys, like when we were younger, don't really have a great idea of what it's really like to be in the field. And so the point was to do some storytelling and figure out what people's journeys were. And this turned out to be a lot more insightful than we had even anticipated. Yeah. Akshay, did I miss out anything? What else do you think we did this for?
Yeah, I also think we did it for the medium, right? Like everything you said, I think that's definitely why we did the content what we did. But we could have written articles or done the more traditional approach of where people communicate stuff. But I definitely think that people don't read. People read much less than what they say they read, and people say they read much less than what the people used to read. So, given that reading itself is something that's dying out, uh, I think there is no point in like catering to a new audience who might actually have their peak content consumption and information gathering and their developing of their worldview through a system that is not perhaps the worldview of us millennials, which would be reading articles and stuff like that. So I think we felt that podcasting would be like jumping on a bandwagon that is slowly kicking off as relatively older people compared to our target audience in some sense would like to imagine, but we don't know. So I think at all points we do require all your feedback. We've gotten a lot of feedback from friends and family, but uh, people who don't know us especially, please write in and please do tell us, because that's the only way we know if this format and this motivation has worked. Yeah. But Ishika, what is your personal motivation for this? You want to share that today?
Sure, Akshay. I think for me, one of the reasons why this podcast was such a great idea from the beginning is because I was very naive when I first got into the field. I think I was one of those people who knew from a very young age that she loved animals, wanted to do something in the field, but I had genuinely no idea how that could be. I didn't even know whether a career in this field was possible, but there is still a lot of stuff about wildlife in general in the larger media. So whether it's Animal Planet, National Geographic that we grew up watching on TV, or whether it was the books I read, a lot of, if you're interested in wildlife, the kind of books you're told to read are things written by Jane Goodall, Diane Fossey, Franz de Waal, like these guys who have spent decades and decades in the field. And for those who were the first generation wildlifers, when the field was starting to be established, when it wasn't as borderline mainstream as it is now, at that time it was actually quite romantic, right? The idea of it. The books talk about how these people went in like explorers into a completely uncharted area and learned about those animals or ecosystems from scratch and spent their entire lives there. But the realities of the situation are very different now, right? It's not, regardless of how much I loved reading books by Jane Goodall or Cynthia Moss or those kind of people, I can't just go to a landscape now and live there for 40 years and say that I'm going to describe everything from scratch, because we've progressed a lot in this discipline. We already know baseline information about all these places. It's not that easy to get to fundraise. You need to have a true purpose. You need to have a proper scientific question. And the challenges of working in the field today as opposed to 50, 60 years ago are very different. And I think growing up, I expected working in this field would be exactly like what I read in those books or saw on TV. And that's not at all what I was faced with. And it doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. it's just different. It's not the reality I was expecting. So I think this is, for me, a great way to bring some of that to light. What about you? What is outside of what we both agree upon and know is the marketed purpose of our podcast? What is it for you?
Yeah, no, I'm still reeling from what you just said because it's so relevant. I think this knowing how the hot dog is made or whatever the global north analogy is, right? But uh, I think personally for me it's also about being in getting to hear the stories like behind the text that we read, because even though books present a certain reality, I think while there are parallels of that which are extremely different, like you said, and something that you only learn by living it or by talking to people who have lived it, I think there's a whole new aspect of it, which is what's going on in their mind, which they think is not worth writing, or not just in books about their lives or like serenading the nature around them, or in hardcore statistics, but things that just sad to say die with them, right? And that's something I found extremely it's almost lamentable that that is happening, and not just in a poetic sense, because I feel like there is the constituency of nature in people is not restricted to us. The people who spend their careers studying nature or wildlife or spending time with them are the privileged of the privileged of the privileged in caste, class, urban hierarchies. For instance, just if you just look at the demographic that we come from, the equivalent would be maybe we could be the 51st state of the United States or something like that, right? In terms of our privilege and economic, social, all of that, right? So we are the ones who are producing the output in terms of scientific stuff and are us talking about nature. But unlike, say, like one of our guests, Krishna, mentioned, you can be passionate about lasers, right? Which is a legitimate thing, right? But to be passionate about lasers, you need to be able to have learned that, had an access to that education and all of that. But to be passionate about nature, you have to have been a human being in some sense, right? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
is something I feel like those are the stories that uh, allow this content to be relatable to anyone and everyone. Of course, that's a little naive to say that in English, in a largely non-English speaking country. But I do think given that motivation will propel us as the podcast goes forward into forays that break these barriers in interesting and novel ways, and hopefully keeping up with the times and also keeping up with the needs of of this field, because ultimately the thing about wildlife is makes no sense if it's not embedded within a conservation ethos of some sense, whatever that may be, right? There we've had debates on the podcast where Tarun Nair mentioned that our perception of local communities is totally flawed, but when many of our guests provide evidence that the contrary is true. So the fact is not if one of them is right, which is what you would think as a 21-year-old, but as you grow older and you see the world, you realize that both are right. So the ultimate reality is how can we encapsulate all these multiple things in a podcast, which then is also adaptive to the future. I'm sorry about the length of that.
No, no. See, this is the whole point of it, right, Akshar? Long form, unscripted. Like when we started off, we were like, oh yes, let's keep everyone's responses to within half an hour. But you asked, like, you would have realized as listeners that all of our episodes start with, how did you get here? What were your early life experiences?
Yes.
And we are asking these questions to people who are at least, what, 30?
Yeah.
So we have asked them to synthesize 30 years of their life in the first 2 minutes of the podcast. So yeah,
Wow.
so it was meant to be long. Yeah. um, yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, Akshay. And I think with those kind of motivations, as we go ahead with the podcast, I think some of these ideas are going to change, and I think we're going to be shifting our focus and shifting our idea of why we're doing the podcast as well. I think hopefully as we hear from more of the audience and keep getting more feedback, and I think it's definitely very important to reach different groups of people, like you were saying. So fingers crossed, hopefully we can make that happen. And if you know anybody out there or have friends who would benefit from learning some of these things that we're trying to bring through the podcast, not so much a shameless plug, but do share, because I think the idea is for this to not just be about entertaining, listening, and storytelling, but actually hopefully be useful to some people who are genuinely looking for answers. So, yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think the reach of this podcast. I mean, I think it's around the stories of the guests, and in some sense, we definitely don't matter. But in some sense, the guests don't matter. It's their stories that matter. So in some sense, even if the podcasts are taken and they're translated into vernacular with names changed if for anonymity or whatever, the value of the content will remain. And we think that that's definitely an avenue where we can expand. Also, while you share it with people, if they have feedback that you would like to relay back to us, that would be great, especially given the motivation that we've put out, and also why you think such podcasts are important for people who like wildlife and nature.
Yeah. And if you're not too comfortable with social media, write to us at thethingaboutwildlife@gmail.com. We both have access and we will respond as soon as we can.
The other thing we thought would be interesting talking about and sort of sharing with you would be the lessons that we've learned, and I mean, I include you, the listener. We've learned on this journey listening to our guests, and some of the themes that popped up, and some of the themes that might be worth remembering, just as pointers to go back to what our guests said and shared as their insights. I think the first thing that comes to our mind is field safety, and our guest Krishna Priya Tamma spoke about it at length, and she spoke about some extremely simple but extremely effective, clearly best practices. The disadvantage with our field is because there are so few people doing these kind of stuff. It's not like we have tons of data showing, whether this approach works or that doesn't. But we know from word of mouth, that there are approaches that work, and this definitely is, which is pointing people to resources that are available if there is a need. And this we found was extremely useful, and something worth remembering as each of us work with or interact with people who do field work.
Yeah, and I think for me, one really important aspect of that episode was not just the need to set in place certain guidelines and protocols on how to deal with these things, but also to actually talk about them. Like, I think one of the biggest issues is that since there aren't any of these protocols in place, and very often this field is looked at as the opposite of a corporate setting, which it actually isn't. It's not that far removed very often, especially in the larger NGOs. But we feel like there is no system or framework within which we can talk about these things, or that it's taboo in a way. And there's so much romanticism in terms of what the field is supposed to be like, that we feel that if we've had a bad experience, say with a sexist comment or active abuse even, we don't know who to turn to. We don't know whom we can trust and whether anything will ever come of it. We worry about whether we can say something bad about a research assistant, a colleague, a field assistant, any kind of field associate. And I think there's a lot that goes on, which we talk about in our smaller trust circles or with our best and closest friends, but not actively at the organizational level. So I think that was a great, bit of, I'd say, awareness that came out from speaking to Priya, that we actually know now that these are things that need to be spoken about, and we need to be more aware of it, because the more we normalize actually discussing what has happened, the better we'll know what kind of infrastructure and facilities we need to set in place to safeguard people against it. And I think that's yeah, that was definitely very important, and hopefully something more people will talk about going forward.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And another small aside of what I remember most vividly from that conversation was how it's important to call people out. I think
Yeah.
not in a cancel culture way, but in a in an actually productive way where that really causes the person to make amends, right? It's not You're not shouting in an echo chamber, but you're actually encouraging or discouraging through information, like not through your opinion, but saying, you know what, this is my experience, great experience or not so great experience with person XYZ. And the important fact is the way Krishna Priyatama dissociated the person's academic prowess with them as people. And I think that's something we don't do at all, especially in India, because we deify people whoever they are. And like one of the people I ironically deified told me, the moment you start deifying people, the higher you place them, the greater is their fall when you see the follies in them, which is definitely true. But yeah, that was something.
Yeah, no, very good point. The next thing that we had noted down that we wanted to talk about was something that came up during Narayan's episode, which was so much fun because we not only spoke about pure science and ecology and the love of the landscape, but I think one of the most salient things from that was how he mentioned that it's good to have a base knowledge about nature and wildlife and how these ecosystems work, but what you do with that knowledge is up to you. It's up to your interests, your skills. And he talks about how he has students who learn about nature at the master's level or the bachelor's level, and then go on to do theater, to sing, to work with government, work in policy. And I think that was a very interesting episode to just do something else with your knowledge for nature, which doesn't have to be science at all.
Oh yeah, that goes back definitely, and that goes back to our point about how a lot of our guests indicate that uh, we have to build this, and we have to encourage and provide sort of some intellectual nourishment to this constituency of nature, and this is spread out everywhere. They might be working in shell, and they might still have care about nature and environment. So the paradoxes of capitalism that many of us tend to use as a ruse to be in this field is a construct. I think what's more common is just people liking nature, and I think uh, yeah, I think I think only a teacher like Narayan would be able to sort of almost intuitively and effortlessly have a story to back your gut feeling, that he encourages all of us to have a gut feeling that I think we definitely picked up post that episode, and we hope you did too.
Yeah, and I think this is the beautiful part about nature, right? And anything related to wildlife, that you can do so much with it. Like it's not a limited skill set. I think it is very truly interdisciplinary. You can pick different aspects of it and run with it. You can be somebody from media. You can, you can make a podcast. You can do science. There's a lot. You can be an admin person, you can be in accounts and help a wildlife NGO manage their finances better. There's just so many ways in which you can contribute to this field, and having a good base knowledge of what these ecosystems are actually like and what the conservation needs are currently. I think all of that is just wonderful to have in your arsenal. It's just, I think it's um, something that should ideally be part of everyone's education as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, this reminds me of just a quick aside, which is one of the people I'm currently working with. Let's call him Mr. G. He he's from the local community, and his job is to he gets whatever daily job that it could be building a house or helping with some construction elsewhere. But he now occasionally comes and visits us, and when he's bored, he observes a snail which is roosting on the roof of our house, go all the way down and feed at night on which plants, and then walk back, and then sort of slide back up in its slime. I think this kind of natural history observations is what connects all of us, and what we hope that the podcast will sort of bring to life.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I think it's very easy to interact with nature if you're willing to. And I think Vena's episode talks a lot about just very simple ways in which you can start observing nature through multiple senses. And I think if you haven't heard that episode, if I'm not wrong, I think it was in the second part of our conversation with her in part two of that conversation, where she talks about how easy it is actually to just start opening your eyes and ears to what's around you. And you never know where that will take you, and whether you will want to switch gears entirely, whether you want to just make it a side hobby. But yeah, those are great places to start. Um, and I think, yeah, go ahead. Actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's an important point. It just reminded me about something, which is, you know, one thing that the same very point about how nature is sort of universal and you can be curious, like Vena said, about anything, and anyone could be passionate about it. That does not reflect in our guest lists. The kinds of people we have invited are people who have picked this as a career. So in some sense, we have failed in documenting people who did not find a professional calling in nature, perhaps tried and perhaps failed, or perhaps chose not to, right? So both of these are very important subsets that we think are definitely worth talking to. And I think implicit in the fact that we miss them is this assumed hierarchy of the way you interact with nature, that people who go into forests and far off places and do macho things, or look at rare things, this importance of rarity, all of these things stem from an assumed hierarchy of where the people who have the most knowledge and that is least accessible tend to be most prized, which is the opposite of how it should be with nature, and it is with nature, right? So, in some sense, we who spend our lives as academics looking at very fine scale and esoteric things are probably the least effective ambassadors of nature. Who are the most effective ambassadors are people who are probably just living their lives but observing nature and somehow being self-aware about their observations. So I think that's another motivation for the podcast.
Yeah, no, very, very good point, Akshay. And there shouldn't be that hierarchy. I think it should be a lot more free flowing, and every little bit that anyone does should be appreciated, which I think would be so great. And yeah, I think the next point, maybe Akshay, you can elaborate on a little more, is to do with a common thread of the kind of mentorship that a lot of our guests or had in their more formative years of their career in wildlife, and the importance of it. And I think that both in terms of being able to either just by a stroke of luck receiving the right kind of mentorship, or also what happens if you don't receive it, and also in terms of learning over the years what kind of mentorship you want and seek and crave. um, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very important and sort of subtle but ever persistent thread through our episodes. And I think it all stems from, in some sense, a survivorship bias, right? So the people we interview are interesting and sort of passionate people, and interesting, passionate people choose interesting, passionate mentors or end up with them, or maybe the mentors make them, either which way. So they've had great and very, very fulfilling mentorship experiences. And many of our guests, from Meghna Agarwala to Krishna Anujan to Tarun Nair to Nitya Mohanty, all of these people speak fondly of their mentors, not in a personal level, which I'm sure they probably do, but deeply in a professional level, like in a transformative way, right? Um, so I think we should again emphasize on the survivorship bias in the mentorship aspect as well, not just in our selection of guests and who is a spokesperson for nature, but what allows them to be a spokesperson for nature, right? So in some sense, the people who have had bad mentors, people who have had mentors who have not encourage their initial gut feelings towards nature, which I think is inherent in all us as a species, have are people who have left with very bitter experiences, and we know personally of a few people who had those kind of experiences. So at that point, I think it's also important to realize, and perhaps this was not this came about implicitly, not explicitly in our podcast, but I think it's important to make it explicit, which is that your passion and love for nature in whatever form is independent of the people who are the medium of interaction with nature, right? So you becoming less passionate about nature because of a bad experience or something has nothing to do with nature. It has to do with through whom you have seen nature. So it doesn't mean you keep going back to places that have bad memories for you and that trigger things for you, but it means that it's also important to dissociate these two things, and I think that will really help, especially because it is a crisis discipline. It is a discipline of a lot of grief and ecological grief for something that came about extensively, and we had an amazing solution by Tarun Nair, which you should go back and listen to on that episode. But given that there is so much negativity, it's even more important to have high context over where what drives your passion and what detracts from your passion, and how that's actually not related to your passion. And just one last point, I think one of the things that I remember asking one of our mentors, one of my mentors, I don't want to name them without asking them, was how do they work with so much grief? Because day in and every day, if you're doing conservation, not research specifically, but if you're doing conservation, every day the slate has been wiped clean. You don't make progress incrementally like you're a company and you're doing mergers and acquisitions and growing bigger, and therefore you can take a longer weekend off. No, after 15 years you have the same working on weekends. So I asked them, how do you stay positive, how do you sort of work with this negativity? I know there's been a lot of talk about conservation optimism, and Nupur, our last episode, she wrote a wonderful article on this, and that's definitely an approach, especially for people starting out, to look at the positives and move on. But this mentor I'm speaking about said the opposite, in fact. He said, you have to channel that negativity. In fact, that negativity is what reminds you at a daily level why you're doing what you're doing. So, in some sense, having the mentorship and knowing the difference between a bad mentor and what actually motivates you is really important.
Yeah. Oof, I could not agree more, Akshay, with the things you said. And as you were talking about that, it also reminded me of another aspect of mentor-mentee relationships, and something that I think a lot of early career researchers or any individuals in the field encounter, especially when they're working with NGOs. Is this idea of how passionate you need to be about the field, right? And the idea that we're all doing some work or the other with nature because we care deeply for it, we are super passionate about it. And as long as we get to go to a forest once in a while and work there, we're happy. And that's all we need. And I think that was perhaps a lot more true for the first generation wildlifers in India, especially. I think who are still today like our veteran wildlifers who are still around, and who are still mentoring those who are just entering the field. Say those who began their work in the 60s or the 70s, and India was a little later to the whole environmentalist movement as compared to the Western world. And at that time, the idea of being associated with this field or actively making a career out of this field was very peachy. It was something that was accessible only to the more elite and privileged people who didn't have to worry so much about their daily bread and butter, who set aside mainstream careers to be part of this field. And for them, it was truly that passion and privilege that drove them. But now that's not the case. And for it to be a lot more accessible to people from various backgrounds and students who are not perhaps very privileged, but who still want to be part of this field, the argument that you need to have nothing but passion and not need anything else in terms of infrastructure, support, intellectual autonomy, monetary support, being able to draw a regular paycheck. These are now becoming more and more part of the necessity of being in this field. And I think that is also something which we very subtly spoke about in the podcast, but perhaps we can pay more attention to as we go forward, that perhaps it doesn't have to be this rite of passage, right? For you to have endured every bit of hardship that your senior mentor has. And so I think that is another very interesting aspect where, as a student, you should be able to clearly voice your needs and what you would like to get out of this field, because in a highly competitive capitalist world, it's not possible for you to run on nothing but passion anymore. And for the number of people getting into the field, I don't even think we have enough resources, for everyone to be doing it for nothing but passion. So I think perhaps that's something we should be aware of and keep at the back of our minds when we are interacting with mentors, and know that this is something we can articulate as and when necessary.
Yeah, this riles me up in a good way, like in agreement with you, because but I would like to differ in the sense that I think it's not perhaps time to do this. I definitely think that it is the thing to do, and I also would strongly believe that not doing so is basically criminal. So you are extracting labor from people in exchange for passion, and not in exchange for things that are actually beneficial to humans. So I feel like the best way I think to sort of illustrate this is through an example, because what happens is when you say these narratives, oh, people shouldn't hire volunteers without paying them, and then the NGO sector is going to be like, we don't have funds, we don't have FCRA, we have all these issues. So and you also understand them, right? Because these are not large corporations who it's not a grapes of wrath situation. It's the people who are talking to you and who are raising these funds. So when that's the case, I think it's important to humanize them, but not let go of and not get gaslit by them. And I think that's a very, very fundamental difference. So let me illustrate that with an example, right? So we all know about nest parasitism, which is basically, in one line, is basically you have species of cuckoos. Not all, but most cuckoo species, which have evolved to lay their eggs discreetly in nests of crows. And when the crows are not looking, and not just crows, lots of other birds, including babblers and all of that. And these birds, because of imprinting, end up raising cuckoos. And it's such a successful strategy that entire species survive with just these subsidies from other species by hoodwinking them, right? Now, you might say, well, it's a great strategy, but if, as someone who cares about nature and was curious, you obviously are going to ask a follow-up question: why haven't these host species sort of died out, and why haven't the cuckoos sort of killed themselves in some sense by taking away their hosts? I think these balance of nature involves some cases where these crows find out about a cuckoo's egg, and then drop it out of the nest, right? There is murder involved, right? So there is sanction involved in some sense. So I think just to draw this long analogy to a close, I think that we are all in a system where people are driven to work on their incentives. So NGOs are incentivized to get free labor and get work in exchange for passion, but we should be incentivized to be paid reasonably and to be compensated for our actions. It is an arms race of some sort, and there is sanction involved. There are unpleasant moments where you have to break a few eggs and not walk on these eggshells, but it's definitely worth it.
Yeah. And I think we'll request you to take that analogy in a figurative rather than literal sense. We do not advocate for murder. But yeah, no, I think that's actually a very good analogy. And if we had more time, we could even unpack that further. Yeah, so actually, why don't we move on from there, which became a little intense, to a lot of the other aspects that came out in the episodes, which is just how happy some of the guests are to be working in nature, right? I mean, I think we started out with asking everyone about how they got there and uh, why they ended up in this field. And so many of them just told us how it is good for their mental health. It brings them peace regardless of what is happening in the field. They're just so happy to be out there working in nature, looking at animals that they admire and love. And I think that's just such a great unifier and something that, I mean, there is nothing to unpack there, right? There's no two ways about it. It's wonderful. It's the one brilliant perk of being in the wildlife field, that there will be parts of your career and parts of your year that you spend away from a city, in some of the most beautiful landscapes, studying some wonderful species, and yeah, that we got to listen to so many cool stories.
Yeah, and just to add and sort of present a counter narrative to that, while it's true that most of our guests found that passion for nature, and in fact, that's why we started the podcast. So there's like Ishika said, there's nothing to unpack. It's basically sort of providing evidence for why there is a constituency of nature. But there is the other aspect of it, right? Which is that n- uh, even when people are interacting with nature, they are in some sense interacting with humanity, right? I know this sounds very cheesy and perhaps one it need unpacking. So let's use what our guest spoke, right? So in the episode with Nishant Srinivasaya, who spoke about elephants, he mentioned something very interesting, which is about how he's documenting different local cuisines and restaurants where they eat, not just restaurants, it could be a small shack, and the passion that he showed for that was somewhat similar to the passion he shows for elephants. At the same time, in the same episode, a few minutes back, he previous to that, he mentioned that he's sort of someone who would not shy away from wearing a T-shirt that says "I like animals more than people." Right? So. I think these two ideas can coexist. I think a lot of people young starting off decide that, no, I like animals more than people, so I'm going to avoid people. But at the end of the day, it just means that you like them both. And I think that came about incredibly well. Like the way Krishna Priyatama spoke passionately about teaching, Narayan Sharma about teaching and his students in mentorship and the landscape, which includes people. Nisarga about, staying down, talking to fishermen, and Tarun talking about fishermen, Nisarga about kayaking down the river and then staying at the night and with talking to people around. So these are all interactions. And I think we should also remember that what we are romanticizing in some sense, unabashedly on this podcast, is nature, but nature through the lens of fieldwork, right? So people studying E. coli are also studying nature, but what is closer to our experience that we are trying to talk on this podcast is the fieldwork of social scientists, archaeologists, geographers, people interacting with nature, working with large NGOs, or maybe even with social enterprises, making money, but living, not that making money is a bad thing, but living close to nature and interacting with local communities and nature. And I think that's the larger theme about the other aspect of happiness that comes implicitly.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. And I think that's so much more relevant in a place like India, because people are truly part of an ecosystem, right? I don't think we have any of these quote unquote inviolate areas left. Mostly, you know, anywhere in the world, but so much so in a place like India, where there's simultaneously such rich biodiversity, such unique landscapes, such um, rare species found nowhere else, living hand in hand with people. There are just so many people, and they pour into forests, grasslands, marine systems, and we're actively using the same resources that all of these places are using, all of wilderness is using. And so here, more than in any other place, there is that you can't disentangle the two. And the more time you spend in the field, you realize that there is nothing, you are getting only half the picture if you discount people from a system. And I think, like you're saying, Akshay, it is important to look at both things simultaneously, for sure, because and you can go in very different directions, right? I mean, if you're looking at conservation issues, very often just saying you want to work on a topic which is relevant to conservation directly means that people are involved, because you don't go and tell a tiger that, oh, you're endangered and we are going to save you, but you talk to the people about it, right? The reason why the word conservation even comes into the picture is because our work lies with the people and in a more sociological sphere. Because the crisis is what we are doing to the system, not the fact that animals exist or plants exist or trees are there or fish are in the sea. That's not the issue. So I think that's something which definitely came out a lot while speaking with Priya and Meghna and even Nupur, where you may not anticipate needing to work with people beforehand, but you just cannot ignore it once you spend time in the field. And not to say that you have no option, but to include people in your science. But the more applied we get in our work, I think the more and more we're seeing people being involved in these spaces. And right from designing a study to implementation and outreach. And I think they've also been some of the more entertaining parts of a lot of people's field work, just interacting with different kinds of people and learning from people in terms of their culture. And it's
Yeah, I think that that final chuckle summarizes our collective, appreciation of the complexity and almost the obviousness of it, that we shouldn't even be talking about it, right? And also, by the way, just a clarification: while Ishika mentioned pouring out of forests, pouring into forests, it's always a feedback loop, right? So there's, when you say they're pouring into forests, they've always been in forests. They're coming out, they're going in, because we've been in some sense part of the ecosystem. So yes, I think, and like Nishant, I think in at the end of his episode where he talks about his conservation work, ongoing conservation work, he does say that there is a reluctance um, in having to work with people. And I think even when Nupur mentioned initially that it's about people, there is that initial where, where you're slightly disappointed, where like, oh, I'm not going to be working with animals then. And I think that feeling, the earlier it comes, the better for all of our listeners and us. And I think all of us wishes that it came earlier, at whatever point it came, because it's about seeing the truth for what it is. And yeah, the shorter you stay deluded, the better it is.
Yeah, for sure. And I think speaking of things that we should start incorporating earlier, one theme which came out a lot across our episodes was that of interacting with forest departments and actively working with them. And I think this was something we particularly wanted to talk about because we realized that there is a very inherent bias amongst ecologists and conservationists where we feel like it's us versus them, where them is always the forest department. And that need not be the case, right? We've had people like Meghna who, very interestingly, when we first asked her to tell us about whether she's had any unpleasant interactions with the forest department, which was a very, very leading question on our part because we assumed that that would be the case. And she just replied very monosyllabically saying, no, it's all good. And we had to probe further to figure out why it was all good. And that threw us a bit. And but that is true. Like the fact that there are definitely people who've had good experiences with them. And the fact that, many of us have not had the best experiences with them also is our fault, right? The issue cannot always be the at the other end. I think there's a lot we need to fix with how we communicate our science and how we explain the purpose of our work, and how we can move towards having better, healthier collaborations. And I think stories of success need to come out more. And perhaps we should also be dissecting what we are doing wrong. Every time we have an interaction which doesn't go so well, what are things that we could have fixed, and how can we make these things better? So I think that that disparity across some of the interviews, and of course some of them have been very extreme, like in the case, like in some of the stories that Tarun Nair shared with us. What do you think about this, Akshay?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this because I've had a very good experience with the forest department when I worked there for my masters. But at the same time, you know the experiences that others have had, right? So I think there's a combination of a lot of factors that go in, and I think it's important to realize that your passion for your your question about how fragmentation affects bird communities is not what the forest officer there cares about. Even if he or she does, that's one of many more things. And as a researcher, many of those things are things that you cannot even imagine, right? Or even if you are not a researcher, as a conservationist or a filmmaker or anyone invested in nature, because you are not seeing the role of like someone mentioned this very nicely some time back. Sorry, no attribution, but among the Indian civil services, the forest department is the only one that whose job is to say no. Everything else is to build. But the forest department's job is to stop things from happening, right? But obviously you don't see that. You see a lot of construction, a lot of that mindset about, we need to build more tourism and infrastructure. And I'm sure the amount of concrete poured into protected areas to build all these things sort of counterbalances it. That's a segue. But the point I'm trying to make is there are these incredibly complex incentives that the forest department has to be who they are. And we know many people who are perfectly agreeable, nice people who continue to be in the forest department and navigate both worlds. And you can't, perhaps it's impossible to imagine being able to do that. We know some people who are doing that, and hats off to them. And I think a greater respect and greater humility, it will go a long way in us being able to see why what is happening. In some sense, it's important to be humble and to be opening our eyes and not really going to the other side, because there are truly bad interactions, right? Like, I know one of the main reasons why I had a good experience in the forest department is because I'm a man, and the men there are a lot more comfortable with the idea uh, that a single man is doing this work as opposed to a single woman working on their own, is something where they need an answer, they need an explanation why, right? So right from the beginning, you're on the back foot if you have all these things against you. And language plays a role, your caste plays a very important role. People are able to guess your caste, and surprisingly and not surprisingly, a lot of people coming from the wildlife field are all belonging to the upper caste. So there is that dynamic that is at play, which perhaps allows us ironically to work better with our field assistants, because the frontiers of civilization close to nature are where the disenfranchised have been pushed historically our species, and caste is no exception. So we actually, the perhaps the way we being able to work so easily with local communities and not with forest department is actually a reflection of our privilege, is actually a reflection of our ignorance of why we are able to work so well. So I think all these just I think ecologists stop learning about animals and plants for a bit. I think that would really help in work with the forest department.
Oh, yes. So well put, Akshay. And I think that's something we should really reflect on. And I think it'll also perhaps be very useful for us to soon invite some people who have been working with the forest department for a long time, working in the forest department for a long time, to come and talk to us. And I think outside of being aware of our privilege, our positionality, as it's called, right? I mean, when like when we do work in the social sciences, our positionality as a person, which is essentially what you just described, where the economic background you come from, your gender, your caste, your sexuality, it all plays a role into who you are and the vibe that you're putting out there in terms of how people perceive you. And that can really change, right? Well, if you were to go talk to somebody, to the same person in the forest department, and say the exact same thing, and I said the exact same thing, it would be perceived very differently, whether it's the tone of our voice, our gender, whatever it is. And it's very important to be self-aware about that, regardless of who we are interacting with. And also just be humbled by the idea that there's nothing special about us, and that at the end of the day, we are not doing as much for that system as somebody in the forest as somebody in the forest department is, because they're actively working towards various facets of it, even if it's just monitoring the place, right? And so I think it's also about shifting our focus from what the differences are about in terms of what we want, what they want, about how much they want to say no. We need to stop, think out of that binary and start looking a little bit at what the commonalities are. What are these things that bring us together? There are certainly some common goals there, and I think it's also about identifying those and finding the right kind of compromises, realizing that being very aware of the kind of power we hold and using it properly. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me. There is a short aside. There's a lot of conversation about how within, I mean, with friends in the forest department or who have interacted with them, there's a lot of conversation about how working in far off places and away from centers of power is where forest officers can make the most difference, right? So at the same time, they are the ones we hear about the least. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the maximum impact that can be perceived to happen and the least impact that actually can happen are both happening around us, right? In some sense. So, and it's not, these forest officers are almost going randomly to different places, right? So it's not different officers going, although that might be the case. So, in some sense, it's understanding how power works and how power constrains you from doing the right thing in an absolute sense and doing the right thing in a local sense at the same time, not letting or at the same time, like perhaps taking undue credit for what you do, because for instance, there is a very interesting article by Forrest Fleischman, who writes why do for who wrote this amazing article called "Why Do Foresters Plant Trees?" And it's the sociology of foresters. It basically understands how the entire incentive structure is towards increasing the number game, and which is why which is why that sort of non-ecological idea persists even among people who might deep down know that it's a futile exercise, right? So I think these are things that we all need to ponder about. With that, we've come to an end of the last episode of season one. Thank you so much for listening to this episode and every other episode of this podcast. Do write in with your feedback, and thank you to those who did. And we'll be back. We're taking a break right now, but we'll be back in about 6 months with season two of the Thing About Wildlife podcast. It's going to be better. It's going to be more intense. It's going to be more fun. And hopefully, we'll incorporate a lot of the feedback that you've given us. And hopefully, we'll become better podcasters too and improve your experience listening to us.
Yep, can't wait to see you at the other end. And while we are prepping for season 2, we're gonna come back every now and again with little snippets, but we won't tell you what it is just yet. And that's going to be our bonus surprise peppered in along the way. So as a little thank you for staying tuned for as long as you have. So yeah, we are super pumped and excited and can't wait to talk to more people and play around with the podcast even more. So yeah, stay in touch. We are the thing about wildlife at gmail.com. And yeah, see you soon.
Thanks for listening.